Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me once again as we look to the horizon. Coming back to you with this week's writing vlog update. And the long and short of it is, I did pretty well this week. I managed to complete about 2/3 to 3/4 of the first chapter of the Gospel According to Earth, which is pretty exciting work. More than I was thinking I might get done in a single day. Of course, my goal was to get a whole chapter. I always set my goals pretty high, higher than I think I can actually achieve, so that if I do achieve them, I know I have hit a new threshold in my work. Unfortunately, I didn't hit this goal, but I did pretty well. And I think that this story is off to a pretty good start. As for Burning Bright, I have finished all of the edits. Now, there are several things that I want to go back and add to the story on top of that. And do I have a goal for that this week? The answer, unfortunately, is no. I am actually getting ready for a stage production that I'm a part of, and this week is Tech Week. That means I'm going to have most of my time this week spoken for, between the obligations of Tech Week and then all the catching up that usually comes after that with dishes and cooking and stuff like that. I am probably not going to have a whole lot of time this weekend to do writing, and I want to devote the time that I do have to completing the first chapter of the Gospel According to Earth, and perhaps writing a little bit further. So that's really my goals for this week, and I think they're doable, but we'll see how we stand at the end of the week. If I turn out to have a little more time than anticipated over the weekend, I will of course work some on revising Burning Bright and adding in those sections that I really want to add to the story. For the most part, what I intend to do here is to add a viewpoint character, which is a difficult thing to do overall. Because the story is written in the third-person limited narrative style, I wouldn't have to change too much. For example, the pronoun I is not a part of narrative dialogue, so I wouldn't have to go out and change I's from one character, from Dai Li, who is currently the only viewpoint character in the story, to so I wouldn't have to change I to Dai Li or something like that. That's what I'm trying to say there. At the same time, a lot of the prose attempts to mimic the general thinking patterns that Dai Li has, and he's a very different character from Nelson, who's going to become the other viewpoint character. They're from very different places, they're from very different backgrounds, and most importantly, they think in different metaphors. Dai Li is a orchard keeper, a grove tender, a gardener, if you will, and he thinks a great deal about the world in terms of plants, and not only his dialogue, but some of the narration reflects these habits of thought. On the flip side of the coin, Nelson is a little bit of a sophisticated person. He's had a well-to-do upbringing, although he's not himself quite a member of what we would consider the aristocracy. He does come from a hereditary position, and that gives him very different thought patterns and idioms and things of this nature. So it would be important, I think, for the narrative prose to be changed to reflect the way Nelson thinks about the world, the kind of details he would prioritize, as opposed to the kind of details Dai Li would prioritize, and change some of the dialogue and the internal monologue to reflect that. It's really important, if you're going with a limited third-person narrative, to put some thought into those kind of things. Even if it's not a first-person narrative, having your prose reflect the thoughts of the person who you are following from your limited perspective is a good technique to make the story feel like it has a unique texture or a unique voice, which is something authors talk about a lot. Now, if you're going for a third-person omniscient narrator, that is much less important, and you do want to keep the narrator very consistent. And there's probably not going to be as much internal monologue, although Frank Herbert did that a great deal in Dune. I found that narrative device to be, frankly, a little bit disorienting. Even when I got used to it, I wasn't a huge fan of it. So on the whole, when I write in third person, which is my preferred narrator viewpoint, limited third person, I try and keep a I try and give the prose a specific voice so that people feel like they are getting to know the characters, even in the narrative prose, rather than just through dialogue. It helps build a rapport faster without some of the baggage that comes along with the first person viewpoint, which tends to be it tends to give the reader a sense that the narrator they are following is going to survive, because first person viewpoint stories are almost always told in the past tense. So that gives a real strong sense that we are hearing a story from somebody who's already lived through it, and so they must live through the story in order to tell it to us. Which is, I mean, it works. It works for a lot of stories, but especially those with high stakes to them, it sometimes seems to take away the risk of danger, at least to the narrator. Obviously, every character around the narrator, we don't know their ultimate fate, so there can still be a lot of concern for those characters, but for the narrator, not so much. And once you read Burning Bright, you'll understand why it's important to keep the ends of these two characters in doubt as I tell the story. So your narrative voice does require certain things, or does impart certain things to the audience. And as the author, if your goal is to leave your audience with a specific impression of your story, I think it's very important to keep those impressions in mind as you select everything, obviously, but especially your narrative voice, which is one of the things that your audiences are going to be spending the most time with. Outside of your protagonist and your antagonist, it's probably the most important part of your storytelling technique. So I've started to think about how I want to change some scenes be told from Nelson's point of view. But what I realized as I began to think about this is that I don't want to tell too many of the scenes that I originally wrote from Nelson's point of view. And I do want him to be a bigger character in the narrative. He was not originally, in the outline, I don't think he even had a name. But he's grown to be more and more important to the story as I've written it and redrafted it time and again. And I've decided that in order to really emphasize this and make the readers more in tune with him until the story is over, and so they can really appreciate the part he is playing, especially at the climax, where he turned out to have a much bigger role to play than I originally anticipated, I thought it was important that Nelson be continually moved further forward in the story. And by writing new scenes specifically for him and from his point of view, not only do we get to learn more about Nelson and about how he looks at the world and about how he is interfacing with the various characters he meets, we also get to look at some of the other characters that whose roles I had to reduce in order to expand on Nelson's role in the story as I went through subsequent redrafts. And originally I had a stable of characters that I rather liked and I wanted to spend more time with, but as Nelson pushed himself further and further to the forefront of the story, I found I had less and less space for them as I originally envisioned the story. But by making Nelson a viewpoint character, I can separate him from Dai Li a little bit and allow him to interact with some of these other characters in ways that expands on him and the supporting cast in ways that I couldn't necessarily do when I was restricted to Dai Li's viewpoint. So all in all, I think these changes are going to be an improvement, but they're going to be a lot more work than I was originally anticipating when I hired an editor to help me redraft the manuscript. So, yeah, I left this till the end, and it's going to be a little bit of work. It is going to be actually a bit of work, I think. And it's probably going to push the release of the book back at least 2 weeks. I am looking at a June or possibly July release date at this point because I have a vacation coming up in June, and of course I'm doing this theatrical production. So I'm going to have some holes in my writing schedule coming up. Hopefully, though, I will still be able to get it out by the midpoint of the year. That is my current goal, given all the other things I have to do. We'll see where we come out at the end. Anyway, that's where the writing process is at. For the 2 stories I currently have going, I think they're going pretty well, but not nearly as fast as I would like. That's what I got for you today. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit, and I will talk to you later.